welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something incredibly complex, but absolutely vital in military planning. How does the Army actually save its wounded when facing, well, sheer chaos?
Yeah, it's a critical question.
Our mission today is to really unpack the doctrine, the rules governing the Army health system, and try to understand the huge transformation needed for it to cope with what everyone's talking about now. Large-scale combat operations.
And this is definitely a deep dive where, the numbers themselves paint a picture of a potential systemic crisis. We're drawing straight from the source, Field Manual 402, that's the Army's official health system guide.
Right.
And we're layering that with some really critical forward-looking analysis. We're looking at insights from Colonel Matthew Fondre, and also this really detailed article, Casualty Care Implications of Large-Scale Combat Operations by Mason Remendelli and his colleagues.
So our goal for you, the listener, is pretty ambitious. We want to break down the core ideas, look hard at the specific, massive risks you face in a peer fight, where, let's be honest, survival isn't a given anymore, and then lay out the systemic changes that have to happen.
Yeah, everything.
We mean everything from getting blood to the front lines to how medical units are commanded. It's all about conserving fighting strength in the next big war.
And that's really the starting point, isn't it? That transition. For the last 20 years, the U.S. military basically owned the sky, had clear road.
Total air superiority, yeah.
Exactly. Those counterinsurgency fights, they led to amazing advances in battlefield medicine. We achieved the lowest case fatality rate in history, which is incredible.
It's really remarkable.
But that success, which the whole system kind of leans on now, Colonel Fondre warns us, that reliance doesn't mean we're ready for the next fight. Not in an environment where we absolutely won't control all the variables. Large-scale combat operations are just fundamentally different, tragically different.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, the structure. What exactly is the Army health system, according to the doctrine? How does it divide up its huge job?
Well, Field Manual 402 calls the Army health system a key part of the bigger military health system. Its main job is managing two core mission sets. If you think of it like maybe a complex machine, these are the two main engines, health service support and force health protection.
A complex machine.
Mm-hmm.
Or I liked your earlier Jenga tower idea because the doctrine calls it a complex system of systems. So let's define those two mission sets clearly. Health service support and force health protection.
Okay, think of health service support, or HSS, as the direct hands-on patient care side. It's reactive, it's urgent. This covers medical treatment, both the medics with the troops and the bigger area support hospitals. All of medical evacuation, including the really critical job of medical regulating, deciding who goes where,
Right.
and crucially, medical logistics. That includes managing essential stuff like blood supplies. HSS is about providing care and, frankly, clearing the battlefield of casualties.
Okay, so if health service support is the emergency response, the ambulance and the ER, what's force health protection doing?
Force health protection, or FHP, is more proactive. It's focused on things that promote, improve, or conserve the well-being, both physical and behavioral, of soldiers before they get hurt.
Preventing the need for the HSS side.
Exactly. Field Manual 402 lists things like combat, operational stress control, dental services, veterinary services, which we'll get into, operational public health, lab services. It's about keeping the force healthy and ready. And when the doctrine says system of systems, it really means it. If medical logistics fails, evacuation breaks down, treatment suffers, the force degrades, you pull one block, the whole thing can wobble.
So to manage something that complex, that interconnected, you need clear rules. Field Manual 402, Chapter 1, gives us 6 core principles for all Army health system support. Let's go through them, but maybe think about how they hold up under the stress of these massive operations. First up, conformity.
Conformity is, well, it's the most basic one. Army health system support must conform to the overall operation order. What that means practically is you need Army health system planners involved early, deeply involved in the operational planning.
Otherwise, the medics are in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Precisely. Too far forward, too far back, useless either way.
Okay, next principle, proximity. Getting care as close to the soldier as possible.
Right. Proximity acknowledges that critical need for immediate help, especially with severe trauma. We're talking minutes mattering, not hours.
Yeah.
It pushes that first responder, the combat medic, right into the fight.
Then there's flexibility.
Flexibility is about the system's ability to shift resources, move medical assets quickly to handle changing needs, unexpected casualty surges, maybe the enemy shifts their main attack. The modular design of things like our hospital centers is supposed to help with this, letting commanders quickly reorganize capabilities.
The flexibility sounds good, but mobility, that seems incredibly tough in a contested area.
It's a huge challenge. Mobility is the need for medical units to move fast, to keep up with the force they're supporting. If an armored brigade is pushing forward, say, 50 kilometers a day, its Role 2 medical company has to keep pace, set up, provide care, and move again.
And in large-scale combat operations, you've got huge distances, maybe mined roads, constant threats. Mobility seems severely compromised,
It absolutely is. That's a major friction point.
which leads us right into continuity. This principle says you have to maintain the level of care throughout the whole evacuation chain. But like you said, if air superiority is gone, do our current ground ambulances even have the gear to sustain, say, complex resuscitation during a long, bumpy ride over bad roads?
That is the central problem that the doctrine says we must solve. Continuity means if a patient is getting, say, damage control resuscitation, that's the aggressive treatment to keep someone alive just long enough for surgery, often involving massive blood transfusions.
Right, hemorrhage control above all else.
Exactly. That patient cannot have their care level drop during transport. The move itself has to either keep them stable or, ideally, improve their condition. Maintaining that high level of care for hours on a bouncing vehicle, it's incredibly demanding.
Okay, and the last principle, control.
Control is vital on two levels. First, it ensures those scarce Army health system resources are used efficiently, supporting the overall plan. But just as importantly, control guarantees the quality of medical treatment meets professional standards, follows policy, and adheres to both U.S. and international law.
That emphasis on control, standards, and law brings us to how care is actually delivered. The roles of medical care continuum. It defines care in phases, with capabilities increasing as you move back from the front line. Let's start with Role 1.
Role 1 is right there at the point of injury or very close by. It's immediate life-saving care, emergency treatment, usually by a combat medic or maybe the folks at the battalion aid station. The focus is purely on rapid stabilization.
And stabilization means
Joint Publication 402 defines it clearly. Secure the airway, control major bleeding, treat for shock, and immobilize any fractures. That's it. The goal is either get the soldier back in the fight quickly if possible, or stabilize them just enough for immediate evacuation.
okay, moving back a step. We get Role 2. This is usually at the medical company supporting a brigade. What's the big capability jump here?
Role 2 adds quite a bit. You get some diagnostic tools, x-ray, limited lab services. You also get essential dental care and, importantly, patient holding capability. But, and this is a key point for the U.S. Army specifically,
Yes.
we do not routinely do damage control surgery at Role 2. That only happens if a specialized forward surgical team or a forward resuscitative and surgical detachment is attached, augmenting that medical company. Role 2 is primarily for short-term holding, usually 72 hours max.
Got it. So Role 3 is where the real surgical intervention starts.
Yes. Role 3 means treatment in a proper medical treatment facility, like a combat support hospital or a newer hospital center. These places are staffed and equipped for full resuscitation, initial wound surgery, actual damage control surgery, and post-op care. Patients who can't survive the long trip back to the U.S. get their major surgery here, as close to the fight as possible.
And finally, Role 4.
Role 4 is the definitive care level. These are the big hospitals back in the continental U.S. or other safe areas. This is where you get long-term rehab, complex specialty care, the highest level the Army health system offers.
You mentioned a rule from Field Manual 402, paragraph 135, about how patients move through these roles.
Yeah, it's a general rule, but it's pretty firm. No role of care should be bypassed unless there's a clear medical urgency or it's significantly more efficient or expedient. And this rule really highlights the importance of stabilization at each step.
You can't just leapfrog if the patient isn't stable enough for the journey.
Exactly. You can't move someone to a higher level of care if the movement itself is likely to kill them. So the sending facility must stabilize the patient first, often using damage control resuscitation or forward resuscitative surgery before they're cleared to move up the chain.
Okay, that licks out the system as it's designed to work.
Yeah.
But now we have to confront the reality of large-scale combat operations, the sheer scale. The source materials paint a picture that's, frankly, hard to wrap your head around, a capacity crisis.
The estimates are just staggering. They completely change the conversation about capacity. Mason Remendelli and his colleagues in their article present analysis suggesting that in a sustained battle involving, say, 100,000 soldiers, you could see approximately 50,000 total casualties.
50,000. Let that sink in for a moment.
Yeah.
That's half the fighting force potentially becoming a casualty.
It's enormous. And that breaks down roughly into maybe 10,000 killed outright, about 30,000 needing evacuation to higher care levels, and maybe 10,000 needing care but able to return to duty relatively quickly. But look at the daily rate. The projection is up to 3,000 casualties per day.
3,000 a day. Let's put that in historical context, like Remondelia's colleagues did.
Right. Think about the entire Normandy invasion campaign, Operation Overlord. 85 days of intense fighting. That averaged about 2,459 casualties per day.
So these future estimates suggest we could face casualty rates higher than the average daily rate during Normandy, potentially day after day.
Exactly. We could be generating the equivalent casualties of the first week of Normandy every few days. The modern Army health system just hasn't trained for or been equipped for this kind of mass casualty environment since maybe the Korean War. It will absolutely overwhelm the current setup.
And the enemy isn't passive. Field Manual 402 talks about a near-peer or peer threat, someone who can challenge us across all domains, land, air, sea, space, cyber.
Yeah, the electromagnetic spectrum, the information space, it's multi-domain.
What does that mean for the Army health system?
It means the enemy has the ability and likely the willingness to actively target Army health system operations. They'll go after hospitals, supply routes, evacuation helicopters, things we took for granted in recent conflicts. This leads directly to that core problem Colonel Fondre highlights. We probably won't have air superiority.
And for 2 decades, rapid air evacuation was the standard, the golden hour flight. That's just gone.
Largely, yes. That luxury of controlling the skies meant we could often get severely wounded soldiers to surgery within that critical first hour. Colonel Fondre is clear. In a pure fight, we can't assume that. Air medical evacuation will be severely restricted, maybe only possible in certain windows or areas, which puts enormous pressure on ground evacuation.
But if we're looking at 3,000 casualties a day, ground evacuation seems completely overwhelmed too.
It does. Ground evac becomes the primary method. But as Colonel Fondre points out, our tactical ground vehicles, like armored ambulances, just weren't designed to carry huge numbers of litter patients.
So the math doesn't add up.
Not even close.
Yeah.
You compare the projected number of casualties needing evacuation against the actual carrying capacity of our ground ambulance fleet. The need massively outstrips the capability. And the grim result, if we don't fix that capacity gap, is a dramatic increase in soldiers dying from wounds simply because they couldn't get to care in time.
So if air evac is limited and ground evac is full, commanders are forced to use, well, anything that moves.
Let's clarify the difference between proper medical evacuation and this improvised casualty evacuation.
Right. Field Manual 402,
Yeah.
paragraph 116, makes this distinction, and it's vital for commanders. Medical evacuation, or medevac, uses dedicated medical platforms, ambulances, helicopters with trained medical personnel and equipment on board providing en route care. These are usually marked and protected under the Geneva Conventions.
Okay, that's the ideal. What's casualty evacuation? Casualty evacuation, often called case evac, is moving casualties on non-medical vehicles or aircraft. Think trucks, utility helicopters, whatever's available, platforms of opportunity. The crucial difference is there's no dedicated en route medical care provided during case evac.
So you could be in the back of a supply truck, maybe next to ammunition boxes, with no medic focused on you. That sounds incredibly risky.
It is. It's a risk a commander only takes when the dedicated medevac system is completely saturated, which is exactly the scenario large-scale combat operations predicts. It's a terrible choice, but sometimes it's the only way to move casualties when the alternative is leaving them behind.
It sounds like case evac becomes a necessary supplement, providing extra capacity when medevac just can't handle the volume.
That's exactly its role. It provides crucial extra lift. But everyone needs to understand the risks involved: no specialized gear, no trained medical crew on that specific vehicle. It's a life and death calculation.
So delays in getting to surgery seem inevitable in this environment. But Remondelli and colleagues found something that could mitigate this, something potentially game-changing. Early use of blood products, way forward.
This is possibly one of the most critical findings for future battlefield survival. Their analysis showed something remarkable. While getting to surgery quickly definitely helped reducing mortality for the severely injured by about 40%.
That's just significant.
Very significant. But the early use of whole blood or blood components like plasma and platelets, far forward, reduced mortality by 80%.
Yeah.
Twice the impact of just getting to surgery faster.
80%. That's huge.
It's revolutionary. It suggests that pushing blood products forward, maybe even to the point of injury with the medic, could potentially overcome some of the deadly effects of delayed evacuation. It basically moves part of the resuscitation capability right to the front line, where the helicopter used to be the only hope within that golden hour.
That focus on surviving longer, further forward, leads us straight back to the capacity crisis. Historically, what portion of combat wounds need surgery? And how does that compare to our current surgeon numbers?
Well, looking back at historical combat data, roughly 70% of combat injuries typically require some kind of surgical intervention. Modern weapons cause devastating wounds. So, large-scale combat operations will demand a massive surgical capability.
70% of potentially 3,000 casualties a day.
Exactly. The numbers are immense. But as Colonel Fondre lays out, the military faces a severe staffing crisis, especially for surgeons.
Let's get specific on that surgeon shortfall.
Colonel Fondre's analysis is blunt here. The military health system depends heavily on reserve component medical professionals to staff deployed hospitals, especially for those low-density specialties. General surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, anesthesiologists, emergency docs.
Right, the specialists.
The current manning, combining both active duty and reserve surgeons in key fields like orthopedics and general surgery, is only about 30% of what's estimated to be needed for these projected casualty rates.
Only 30%. That feels like an impossible situation. How can a commander meet the doctrinal standard of the highest quality care when they know they only have a fraction of the needed surgeons? Doesn't that massive casualty load force a hard compromise?
It absolutely forces agonizing choices. The doctrine sets the standard, the ideal, but the reality of large-scale combat operations with these numbers puts immense stress on it. We simply don't have enough surgeons to staff the operating rooms needed for these projected rates, while also maintaining care back home, training new doctors, and handling other global contingencies.
And it's not just surgeons, it's beds too, right? The actual hospital capacity.
Equally dire. The staffing shortage is compounded by a lack of deployable hospital beds. You look back at World War II, the U.S. Army needed over 100,000 hospital beds in the theater and rear areas. Today, our entire inventory of deployable hospitals, the modular hospital centers, provides a total of only about 4,000 beds.
4,000 versus potentially 100,000 needed historically.
The gap is enormous. It means the sheer volume of casualties will rapidly flood definitive care facilities. Commanders will face brutal decisions about who gets a bed, who gets surgery now, and who has to be stabilized and pushed further back, assuming the evacuation chain can even handle that movement.
This forces a shift, doesn't it? If you can't evacuate quickly to a big hospital, the care has to stay with the soldier longer further forward.
Exactly. Colonel Fondre emphasizes this point strongly. Medics, nurses, providers at all levels, especially Role 1 and Role 2, must be trained and equipped for prolonged casualty care.
What does that mean, practically?
It means going way beyond basic first aid. It's managing a critically injured patient, maybe someone needing damage control resuscitation, for 24, 48, even 72 hours because evacuation just isn't an option. It means managing ventilators, complex pain control, wound care, preventing infections, all in an austere environment far from an hospital.
And our current structure isn't built for that sustained high-level care at forward roles.
Not at the scale required. The current structure, the staffing models, they lack the inherent capacity to sustain prolonged care for potentially hundreds or thousands of patients simultaneously that far forward. Without a fundamental shift in training, equipment, and mindset for prolonged care, survival rates will inevitably drop.
Okay, facing these extreme casualty numbers and a contested environment, command, control, and synchronization become absolutely critical. This brings us to the key organization managing this potential crisis, the Medical Command Deployment Support.
Right. When you have operations this complex, you need a single medical command authority with a regional focus. That's the role of the Medical Command Deployment Support, or MedCommDS. Field Manual 402, Chapter 2, describes it as the theater-level medical command. It's responsible for integrating, synchronizing, and commanding all Army health system support within that entire area of responsibility.
So the Medical Command Deployment Support isn't just coordinating ambulances, it's making the big calls, like shifting a surgical team from one area to another where things are collapsing, or telling a hospital to switch purely to damage control surgery because a massive wave of casualties is incoming.
That's precisely its function. It has the authority to task organize all the medical assets, hospitals, evacuation units, logistical support, based on the real-time needs of the fight. Its structure is designed to be flexible, with an early entry command post and a larger main command post for sustained operations. They set the evacuation policy, allocate those precious surgical resources, and manage the overall medical picture for the theater commander.
Let's make sure listeners understand the difference between the medical commander and the staff surgeon. They have distinct roles.
Absolutely vital distinction for how command works. The surgeon, think the corps surgeon or the brigade surgeon, advises their operational commander. They're the expert on the health of the force, medical risks in the plan, medical policy. But the chain of medical command, the commanders of the medical command deployment support, the medical brigades, the medical battalions, they are the ones who actually execute the medical support plan. They own the medical resources and direct their use, maintaining that technical medical channel.
Moving from command to the stuff that makes it all possible, logistics. We need to talk about medical supplies, especially Class 8 and blood. How does medical logistics fit into the huge theater supply chain during a major war?
Medical logistics runs through the Theater Sustainment Command, the main logistics hub. Field Manual 402 explains that the Medical Logistics Management Center sends a forward team to actually sit with the Distribution Management Center of the Theater Sustainment Command.
Why is that co-location so important?
Because it's the crucial link for coordinating medical sustainment across the whole theater. They manage the flow of Class 8 supplies, that's all the medical items. From bandages to ventilators, they oversee blood management, and they coordinate the maintenance of complex medical equipment. The constant challenge is making sure these vital, often time-sensitive medical items get the priority they need when competing with bullets, beans, and fuel in the distribution system.
And with potentially 3,000 casualties a day, you're not just moving supplies, you're moving people replacements. Human resources has to be tightly synced with logistics.
It absolutely does. The Doctrine for Human Resources Support points out a critical vulnerability. Personnel replacements move through the exact same distribution network as ammo, fuel, and parts.
The same trucks, the same planes.
Yes, and the sheer scale of large-scale combat operations just magnifies the complexity of replacing potentially thousands of soldiers. So the Human Resources Operations Center, up at the Army Service Component Command level, has to work hand in glove with the Theater Sustainment Command to weave personnel movements into the overall theater logistics plan.
So tracking casualties isn't just about notifying families. It's about knowing where the holes are in the line, who needs replacing now. It's force regeneration.
Precisely. Casualty estimates tracking killed in action, wounded in action, and also disease and non-battle injuries, which can be significant. These estimates must be part of the planning process during course of action development. They directly inform how many replacements are needed and where.
And how does that tracking happen in practice?
Field Manual 10 on Human Resources Support says that human resources squads focused on casualty reporting need to deploy early, right alongside the medical units, especially at Role 3 hospitals and the Theater Casualty Information Center. This allows for real-time tracking, accurate reporting, and, critically, helps coordinate a soldier's return to duty if possible, which directly impacts the commander's available combat power.
Given the contested environment, the likelihood of medical units being targeted or near the fighting, and the sheer stress of the situation, the legal and ethical rules, the law of land warfare, become incredibly important, don't they?
They become paramount. It's a matter of profound ethical responsibility, but also strategic importance. Field Manual 402, Chapter 3, covers this in detail. The law of land warfare grants special protection to medical units and personnel, what the Geneva Conventions call Article 24 and 25 personnel.
Who does that include?
It's anyone exclusively engaged in humanitarian missions, searching for, collecting, transporting, or treating the wounded and sick. So doctors, nurses, medics, ambulance drivers, hospital administrators, even chaplains assigned to medical units. Their protection hinges entirely on that neutrality, on only doing humanitarian work.
And that neutrality has strategic value too, right?
Yeah.
It's based on reciprocity. We follow the rules because we expect the enemy to do the same for our captured personnel.
Exactly, it's fundamental. But that protection is lost if medical personnel commit acts harmful to the enemy. The doctrine is clear. A warning usually has to be given first, with time to stop the harmful act, but if they persist, they can lose their protected status and become legitimate targets. The stakes couldn't be higher.
What about self-defense? Can medics carry weapons?
Yes, medical personnel can be armed, but only for their own self-defense, or the defense of the wounded and sick under their care. The key limitation is they must refrain from any aggressive action. They can only use their weapons if they or their patients are directly attacked in violation of the conventions. They can't, for instance, fight to prevent their unit from being captured or engage the enemy offensively. Doing so forfeits their protection.
And the Red Cross emblem, the marking. Can you hide it if you need to conceal the unit?
The doctrine is very specific here. There's no such thing as a camouflaged Red Cross. If a medical unit needs to be camouflaged to hide its location or size from the enemy, the Red Cross emblem must be covered up or removed.
But doesn't that remove their protection?
It's a terrible dilemma. The doctrine acknowledges that the absence of the emblem might render the unit's protection worthless if the enemy doesn't know it's a medical facility. So commanders face a choice. Display the emblem for protection but risk being targeted, or conceal the unit for tactical advantage but risk being attacked because the enemy doesn't recognize its status.
Finally, what about treating captured enemy soldiers, detainees, especially when our own resources are stretched so thin?
This is a core ethical obligation. Healthcare personnel must provide ethical treatment to all sick and wounded, regardless of who they are, including detainees. A key principle in Field Manual 402 is that medical personnel must only engage in provider-patient relationships with detainees for the purpose of evaluating, protecting, or improving their health. No other agendas.
And what if someone ineligible for long-term care shows up wounded?
The rule is absolute. If someone arrives at a medical treatment facility needing emergency care, even if they're a host nation civilian or someone not normally eligible, the facility must stabilize them first. Stabilization always comes before determining eligibility for further care or transfer. Treat first, ask questions later.
Looking ahead now, the massive challenges of large-scale combat operations are driving innovation. We hear the term medical multi-domain operations. What does that actually mean?
Medical multi-domain operations, or M2DO, is really about integrating casualty care across that whole spectrum, from the battlefield all the way back, using technology to overcome the challenges of distance and enemy threats that Ramondelli and colleagues describe. The Army Medical Modernization Strategy frames it as providing a full range of connected capabilities across all domains.
The strategy talks about creating care webs. That sounds quite different from the traditional linear evacuation chain we discussed.
It is a fundamental shift. Instead of just thinking roll 1 to roll 2 to roll 3 in a straight line, the Army Health System is looking at creating interconnected care webs. These webs allow for synchronization not just vertically up the chain, but horizontally between units and digitally.
How does digital fit in?
It's key. The idea is to leverage technology, things like a universal digital medical record, shared platforms like the Joint Operational Medicine Information Systems, common data standards so that information flows seamlessly. A provider anywhere in the web should instantly know a patient's history and what's been done, improving continuity of care dramatically. It also means integrating capabilities from joint partners, allies, even host nations, much more effectively.
Logistics also needs breakthroughs, not just for efficiency, but for basic survival if supply lines are cut. What's the Army Medical Modernization Strategy aiming for in terms of new equipment?
The focus is heavily on reducing size, weight, and power needs the swap factor. Think about innovations like dehydrated intravenous fluid bags that you just add water to, or systems that create medical-grade water right at the point of need, or the Holy Grail, shelf-stable synthetic blood.
A true blood substitute.
Oh, imagine that. A blood product that doesn't need refrigeration, that can be carried easily by medics. It would completely change far-forward resuscitation, eliminating the entire fragile cold chain logistics requirement for blood. That would be revolutionary.
And just getting things like blood, even if it's real blood, needing refrigeration, to the front lines in a contested environment where helicopters might get shot down.
That's where unmanned systems come in. Ramondelli and colleagues specifically mention unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. Projects like Project Crimson have already shown that drones can successfully deliver blood and other critical medical supplies right to the battlefield.
So drones offer a way around contested airspace.
Potentially, yes. They're smaller, harder to detect, faster than ground transport in many cases, and you can accept more risk with an unmanned platform than a manned helicopter crew. It's a promising solution for bridging those logistical gaps, especially for time-sensitive items like blood.
Beyond the high-tech solutions, the doctrine covers some specialized functions, crucial for force health protection and overall readiness. Let's touch on veterinary services. Field Manual 402 points out this is unique to the Army within the military.
That's right. The U.S. Army has the only veterinary corps officers in the entire military health system, and their mission is much broader than most people realize. It's really 3 main pillars.
Okay, what are they?
First is food protection, ensuring the safety and defense of the food supply for the entire force. Second is veterinary public health, controlling diseases that can jump from animals to humans, zoonotic diseases, and monitoring local animal disease threats that could impact soldiers. And third is the direct medical and surgical care for military working dogs and other government animals.
So it's much more about protecting the human force from disease and bad food than just caring for dogs, although that's included.
Absolutely. A foodborne illness outbreak or a zoonotic disease could create a mass casualty event just as easily as enemy action, crippling a unit. And for the animals that are part of the team, like military working dogs, their handlers are actually trained in Role 1 Care canine tactical combat casualty care and carry special first aid kits to stabilize the animal if it's injured.
Another key force health protection area is combat and operational stress control, or behavioral health. In the kind of high-stress, mass casualty environment we're talking about, managing psychological trauma seems essential for keeping the force functional.
It's absolutely vital. The goal of combat and operational stress control is to help soldiers manage stress adaptively and prevent maladaptive reactions, things that could take them out of the fight mentally or emotionally. Field Manual 402 is clear that the standard of care and deployment should match garrison standards.
But how does that work in practice near the front?
Interventions tend to be brief, focused, and tailored to the operational reality. The main aim is stabilization, helping soldiers manage acute stress reactions so they can stay on duty if possible, or preparing them quickly for referral or transfer back to a safer area if needed, without tying up critical surgical resources.
And finally, for those soldiers with the most severe wounds or illnesses, there's the Army Recovery Care Program.
Yes, this program, which used to be called the Warrior Care and Transition Program, is a crucial strategic piece for the long-term continuum of care. It bridges the gap from battlefield injury or illness through definitive care and beyond. It provides oversight, guidance, and advocacy for those wounded, ill, and injured soldiers.
What's its ultimate goal?
The goal is either successful reintegration back into the Army if the soldier recovers sufficiently, or a smooth, supported transition into civilian life with dignity and the resources they need.
And the doctrine outlines a specific structure for how that support is delivered.
It does. It relies on soldier recovery units, and within those units, a core concept is the triad of care. The soldiers assign medical provider, a dedicated nurse case manager, and their platoon sergeant or squad leader. This team works together, along with other specialists, to manage the soldier's recovery plan and advocate for their needs throughout that complex process.
We have certainly covered a huge amount of territory today, from the basic principles of the Army health system to, synthetic blood and drone deliveries in the future. I think the core tension we've really explored is this. We have this robust, detailed doctrine in Field Manual 402, which is essential. It's legally binding in many ways,
Right.
but it's facing an absolutely unprecedented capacity challenge when you look at the potential scale and lethality of large-scale combat operations.
That really is the heart of it. The casualty numbers projected by sources like Ramondelli and colleagues, combined with those stark staffing shortfalls, Colonel Fondre highlighted especially that shocking 30% surgeon capacity figure. It demands massive synchronization. Medical, logistics, human resources planning, they all have to work together seamlessly in a way they haven't had to before.
And the focus has to shift.
It has to. It has to shift towards achieving survivability in this contested, resource-scarce environment. That means prioritizing things we talked about, like pushing prolonged care skills further forward, getting blood products to the point of injury, essentially, doing everything possible to keep the system from being completely overwhelmed and collapsing under the sheer weight of casualties.
And if we zoom out, connect this to the bigger military picture, the whole idea of optimizing the human domain, making the individual soldier the key advantage. Well, that requires more than just fancy tech and surgical capacity. It demands sticking to our ethical and legal standards of care, the Geneva Conventions, the law of land warfare, even when facing mass casualties and broken supply lines.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a final, maybe uncomfortable question for you, the listener, to think about after this deep dive. Considering those projected casualty rates and the acknowledged shortfalls in things like surgeons and hospital beds, how might the doctrinal emphasis have to shift? From the ideal we cherish, returning every single soldier to duty, providing the absolute best care possible for each individual toward a harder prioritization, towards force regeneration.
Meaning stabilizing the greatest number possible, just enough to get them back into the fight, even if it means definitive care timelines get stretched for some.
Exactly. It's a tragic calculus. Might future medical commanders be forced, by sheer necessity in the opening days of a pure conflict, to prioritize keeping the maximum number of bodies in the line, potentially at the expense of the ideal care pathway for every single casualty? That's the kind of hard question this new reality poses.